Welcome to the Debrief. I'm Kendal Bailey, your guide through the hilarious, chaotic, and heartwarming world of nursing. Together, we'll peel back the layers of this incredible, gritty profession, embracing the love, laughter, and awkward moments that make it so unique. Each episode, I sit down with inspiring nurses who've seen it all and lived to share their stories. Today, we're diving into a knowledge transplant to discover how to keep that nursing spark alive. Whether you're just starting out, a seasoned pro, or just trying not to lose it. So, Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for being here today. And looking back on your career, you've had this incredible background in clinical practice and academia and now leadership. What drew you into nursing? Like, how did you enter this profession?
Well, I think you might say that it's kind of the family business or that it was in the blood. So I was raised by a physician father and a nurse mother. And although was very close to my mom and certainly admired her as a nurse, it was actually kind of my dad who introduced me to the profession because when I was a little kid, he used to take me with him to the hospitals on the weekends when he did rounds, and he would like put me at the nursing station, and the nurses would take care of me. So I saw pretty early on that a team of nurses is kind of a special group. So very nurturing, very loving to me, very supportive. I can still picture them, and of course, in those days they were all in white, and they had the wonderful big caps with the stripes on them. And as I grew and went through high school and started college, I thought this is something that not only do I think is going to provide me a great career, because let's face it, that is important,
Mhm.
but also a lot of happiness and joy. And I can actually, thankfully say that that 18-year-old made a very good decision, and it has been an extraordinary 35-year career already.
Wow, 35 years. And again, I think back. So you're sitting there at the nurse's station and everybody's walking you down in like their starched, perfect uniforms and caps, and you're just hanging out at the nurse's station, like, yeah, I'm just here with my dad. I'll see you in a little bit. Did you go right into nursing at 18, or did you have any other healthcare experiences before then, or just that time with your family?
So what's very interesting is then you go back 40 plus years. So I actually began volunteering in the hospital. Again, those early experiences were very positive. So there was a program that I think some of your listeners will remember, but it was the Candy Striper program. Well, by the early 70s, it was Candy Stripers and Checkers, and the Checkers were the guys. So I was a checker, which was a candy striper. And we did the like water passing, answered call lights, ran errands. And I actually did that 3 nights or 3 shifts, I think a week. I know I was there 3 times during the week during the summer. So I really got hooked on nursing. That led me to become a nursing assistant by the time I was a senior in high school, made $3.35 and a dime uniform allowance,
Oh.
which I absolutely used because I had to buy the white smocks with the Ben Casey collars. If you don't know who Ben Casey was, Google it. It was an old TV show. Um, and then right into the BSN, and actually then right on to the MSN, and took about a year off and finished with my PhD.
Wow.
So I have the distinction of never ever collecting a paycheck outside of being part of a nursing team to this
You've
day.
you've been grown nonstop in the nursing community. That has been your place. And a lot of what you do now, really centering on holistic care. How has that shaped? How did that grow over your career, especially with your early clinical experiences? Because you were very involved with the HIV and AIDS community. How has that shaped, especially from your early clinical practice years and what you're doing now?
So when I graduated from my BSN, it was at the very height of the AIDS epidemic in our country. So those that was a long time ago. So let me just set the stage a little bit. So this was a time when there were no drugs. We had one drug that had been used for something else that was showing some promise, and the second drug was just in clinical trials. So we really are talking about a time when a lot of the care was geared towards treating opportunistic infections, and those were pretty brutal, and they were the cause of death fairly rapidly in those days. And the treatment for opportunistic infections, while some were effective, we were dealing with people with completely depleted immune systems. So even if they were effective for a time, they ended up being effective always. So much of our care as nurses and what we developed as pioneers in the specialty of HIV/AIDS care is really to approach the care very holistically with a sort of firm path in terms of palliation, quality of life, honoring choices, including the family in terms of those chosen and those who the patient was related to. And that sort of put me on this path of understanding that cure not only isn't always the goal, it can't always be the goal, but the goal can always be healing. And that healing is done within the uh, spiritual realm, within the emotional realm, within the social realm, and of course the physical realm. And my patients in those days were my greatest teachers and taught me that lesson about holistic care. And I'm very proud of that early work.
Well, I will say you light up when you talk about it. Like there's like this like sparkle when you say like my patients. Like it just is like I kind of get that moment where I think about those really impactful patient experiences where I'm like, yeah, I was there in a really deep and real way.
I,
And it's
I
just gives you
yeah,
goosebumps.
well, it's interesting because I remember my first AIDS patient like it was yesterday. In fact, I haven't been in that hospital for now it was while I was a student, 35, 30. So that'll be about 37, 38 years. And if I were to walk into that hospital, could go right to his room. I know his name. I can see the color of his bathrobe. So when I confronted the condition, when I confronted someone living with AIDS, that left an indelible mark on me. And there were powerful experiences with patients over the time I was in clinical care. And I always tell students that, you know, um, you're going to be exposed to lots of great teachers, but your greatest teacher is always going to be your patient. And you have to be open to those lessons. And all those folks are long gone who taught me those lessons, but I honor them every day for what they taught me and what it enabled me to become.
Well, and you share their message. Like you are now working with the next generation and the continuing generations of nurses by sharing their story, right? And how it impacted you and what you've done. And I will say some of the best educators I've ever had are the ones that can really bring to life those experiences. Like this was my first patient experience. This is what really made me love and feel just marked by the nursing profession. And now you've been in here for your entire career. I just, I love that we have those stories that kind of sit with us for our entire lives. It's just
Mm.
beautiful,
And
beautiful moment.
teaching is a privilege. I always say I was lucky to sort of live out both of my vocations, that of nursing and that of being a teacher. The idea that you leave your legacy with your students is something that I rest comfortably with in terms of what I leave behind when I'm gone. And I should also say that second only to my patients, my students have been some of my greatest teachers, and I am thankful that I've been open to those lessons because that wasn't always the case early in my teaching career because I was afraid I wasn't going to be respected or that I didn't know as much as I know. But when I let that all go, boy, I have learned a lot from them and became a much better teacher because of it. And I guarantee you, I'm a much better academic leader from always remembering the voice of the student and always making sure that that voice of the student is with us when we're making decisions.
Well, and I have to admit, like the moment you talked about that, I just thought about like the first time I was an educator and I walked into the room like, oh yeah, like I've got to like own my intelligence and my expertise because they have to know that I am like all that. And those were the times I got myself like, ripped around and backwards because that wasn't authentic to who I am as an educator. It's not authentic to who I am as a person. And those times where I was trying to fake what I thought an educator was were my most unsuccessful moments. That there is, this greatness to your own authenticity, but
Yeah.
gosh, it is terrifying to live there and own who you are in that way.
Well, certainly, and I think your experience was the same as my experience, and I would say that most people transitioning from a clinical practice to life as an educator, even if it's, just including academic teaching as part of your career, I think go through that. And one of the things we don't pay attention to, like thankfully we have turned a lot of attention to in practice, is that transition period.
Mhm.
We know you can't, go from graduating one day with your degree to a fully competent, nurse who can take a full patient load, et cetera, on that first day. But we haven't built in that same sort of structure, and I think that's why we start losing faculty, is because we don't actually take them through that process. And you and I were lucky. Maybe we had mentors. I did. But I also spend a lot of time in reflection. Because if you can't get past that, if you can't get past the um, authoritarian aspects of that, if you can't get past always having to be right, if you can't get past not entering into authentic dialogue about there may be other answers, there may be other ways to think of this, um, you kind of fail as an educator, and you're not going to be happy and you're not going to stay. And we need everyone. We need more people interested in education, and we need those who are good at it to stay.
Well, right. It can't be, which is funny, right? We've made these transitions in like having new grad residency programs
Mhm,
and supporting new graduates and really understanding it takes time to grow in
mhm.
that competency. But we still have many institutions, and I hear all the time of educators who are like, well, I walked in, I had a class the next day. Here's your textbook, write up your stuff
Yeah.
and be successful. And that's a translation, that clinical practice to education. It's not this just natural adoption.
Yeah, and it's probably what you just described, that exact situation is probably by far the most common situation in academic nursing. Yeah, and I can't say that as a dean. I certainly, or an associate dean and then a dean or a department chair before that. I can't say that that isn't something that I've had to enact exactly in that scenario
Mhm.
many, many times. I think we all understand why. It's very costly. Same arguments that have been used why nurse residencies may or may not be the best idea, but we got to do better at that transition.
Mhm.
And because if you don't know how to teach, all you're going to do is sort of try to remember things that happened to you during your educational journey. Some of them may be very good, some of them may be completely against what, the evidence, it may be completely against what the evidence suggested teaching and learning should be when you were in school, let alone the advances in the science that underpins nursing education. And we just don't get anywhere. And the students lose. And certainly the faculty member loses also.
Wow. You almost wish, right? We're getting to this place of really understanding and hopefully identifying like these holistic models and caring
Mhm.
for the full person, right? Like, so how do we translate that to our educators that we need like desperately?
Well, so in addition to, that gentle, it's not onboarding, it's truly a mentored experience. And certainly I think if you've just transitioned, you got to have some didactic content and some simulation and role playing in terms of what in your role as an educator, and all of that I think is very powerful. But then you mentioned the holistic aspect of this. So academic nursing leaders have to create, or maybe even co-create with their faculty, a loving, kind, nurturing environment. um, I've been part of some challenging faculties. I have worked for some challenging leaders. It is not the way it has to be. Um, Competition can be sort of squashed down. Um, you know, Make sure in terms of a culture of collaboration, of helping, um, stop this caste system of different types of positions and lines. We all belong, we all are necessary. And honestly, to demand civility and to give people permission to speak out publicly when that incivility happens. And we have to understand that people come to the educational setting with all kinds of wounds also. So we have to be open to helping them create a environment that works for them in terms of their teaching practice. We start every meeting with a centering exercise. So we stop and take deep breaths, about 5 minutes. We have social times. All of that is so important, and probably more important today than it's ever been, certainly post-pandemic, when there seems to be still some suffering of social isolation.
Well, and you
It's really
talk about
important.
like the time, right? This is an important time, right? And we all say, like,
Mhm.
I don't have time for this, right? As a new grad, I don't have time to do those things for my patients because I have to do these tasks, or I don't have time as a faculty member to work on the culture of my peers and that team. And I'm curious, like when you work, it sounds like you've just created this incredible place. Like, please let me come work for you and your educational team. But do you see that translation then with your students? Like they now see this like strong, cohesive, open, kind group of faculty and nurse leaders. Like I can imagine that there's a translation there with these nurses then and how they go into practice, or at least I can hope.
I hope, I hope so. That is one of the hardest things to gauge or to measure. But if we follow the logic, um, students will learn kindness, compassion. They will learn mercy. Um, you know, think about what a student learns if a faculty says, I'm going to lock the door at 5 minutes past. Now, someone could argue with me that they're going to learn to be on time, but I think that what they're going to learn is there's no room for grace, there's no room for mercy, there's no understanding of the lived experience of what I, as a student, am going through. May have worked night shift, may have be a single parent of two children, may have been delays at the daycare. There is so many, many things that we just need to extend kindness and mercy. They hopefully then will graduate understanding that there is the ability for the workplace to be that way. And hopefully a anecdote to a toxic work environment. And it kind of permeates it permeates how you lead. So for example, just yesterday, we had a focus group with students. We needed to, I mean, I knew that the one clinic, that clinical placement had a lot of room for opportunity. And it was interesting. So this was a clinical that based in holistic practices, where our students were actually in our acupuncture clinic. We are the Pacific College of Health and Sciences is the largest conferrer of degrees in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. We have a huge clinic on the ground floor in the financial district in New York. But so it's like some leaders would sit and say, okay, what went wrong? But no, we have to have a culture of appreciative inquiry. So we started with, if you were going to design this clinical, what would it look like and what would be the best version of that clinical? Now, I'm not saying students always bite, because they do want to, tell you what's wrong. But it's like, so every time that would happen, it's like, okay, can you rephrase that and tell me what it is you need? Because I understand now that this didn't happen. But in order for me to help, and so you just keep in that positive vein in all interactions. It works beautifully, and it doesn't take a lot more time. It just takes a commitment.
Well, and I am naturally a positive person. That is my personality, and you seem to be very similar. And I hear a lot of times that that is too much effort. That's too much work. That's too much time. But it sounds like by getting that buy-in, you really are getting to where they're, again, getting the care that they need to be successful in school. Do you find that takes more time? Are you just do you feel exhausted, having to have that positivity and reframing and refocusing the group? Because that's usually what I hear. It's I'm too tired to do that. That's not my personality. I'm not that type.
That's interesting, Kendall, because yes, I can see that, if it doesn't come naturally, but then what we have to do is work on how we can be more in that mode. I don't know if it necessarily comes naturally to me, but it's sort of a focused effort. And, as you get older, and maybe it is the advantage of age, you actually start to learn that it is the negative and it is the status quo and it is the inertia that is exhausting. What I find, and there is some research that supports the positive mindset and the benefit to you, even physiologically, by having positive thoughts and positive emotions. I always say Descartes got it wrong. The mind and the body are inextricably linked. So what we do when we are acting negative is we are activating all the gunk in our body, as opposed to activating the positive neuroendocrine pathways. An example from research is that, the more we show gratitude, of course, has positive impact on the person who the gratitude is being expressed about or to. But guess what? It is absolutely has positive benefits physiologically and psychologically with the person who's offering the gratitude. So even starting meetings, and we do this after the centering exercise, is we give people the opportunity to express their gratitude to the people who are on the phone on the call. We do a lot of Zoom meetings. I guess we all knew what I meant. um and that just ends up making everyone feel good, including the person. So no, I think probably the person who's in that mindset that it's too much time, too much effort, we just got to work with and break them out of that, because I think they're going to find very much the opposite.
Well, and I think what I hear from you, and I really like this perspective, is you said it's a honed skill. Like
Mhm.
you have dedicated your time to get to that place. This is not something that you just came in with. And like anything, your expertise, your educational background, the amazing leadership roles that you've had, those have all been skill sets that you've had to learn and establish and deploy. And I
can
think
i
so often yeah,
Can I tell you how that was developed? So,
yes.
a lot of that, because there is kind of a key to that, and it's reflection. So, all those other skills, you learn in books, you learn through practical application. But when you're trying to develop your people skills, when you're trying to develop your way of being in the world, when you're trying to develop your leadership style, the only way to do that is to pull back on a regular basis, on a planned basis, and reflect on what happened, why it happened, and what role you had in it. And you got to be brutally honest with yourself, because it's just you in your headspace.
Yeah.
So, something didn't go wrong. And I know my triggers, right? We all have those amygdala triggers. It's all part of the emotional intelligence. All of a sudden, for most of us, it's an ego attack, and that's not unhealthy. But all of a sudden, that amygdala gets hijacked. And before you know it, your mouth opens and you're like, oh boy, that really wasn't the right way. You got to spend time then reflecting on that and be honest with yourself, and then figure out what role you had in the outcome. Do it for the positive things. If something worked out well, what did you do right, Patrick? What did you do right, Kendall? And how am I going to do more of that? But also, it's like, boy, the response I got back clearly was not the intention. I could just say, well, they're dumb. They're stupid. They're looking for a fight. Hmm, maybe. But it's like, okay, how did you say it? Could you have said it better? And all those things. So reflection is one of the most powerful tools we have for, well, I think development of you as a person, but certainly and your development as a leader. And a lot of times, people, it's not my way of doing it because I don't like writing, but reflecting and journaling are kind of the same process. So both of those.
No, I think that's been my favorite is I have like I don't want to say it's my like anger notebook, but it's having that space to like I have that heightened sense. I've had this encounter. It didn't go the way that I wanted to. And I just start like writing it all down. Like here are the things I'm upset about. And then finally, like you said, getting to the point where I can say, okay, why did I get upset about that? And where was the root for that? And did I bring that on? I do like the premise though of being careful of making sure it's not like your own like internal attack. I will say that is very much as an early reflective leader, that was my struggle. I'd get into it and be like, okay, so let me rip apart myself and all the things I should have done differently. But like you said, it might end up being okay, they just want it that just how they are, or that was a bad day for them. But having the grace to say, okay, I know what I can work on. I know the things that I did well and sit comfortably in that place. That's hard.
It is, but here's how we extend the same way of being to ourselves that we're extending to others. So, yes, you can't practice kindness and compassion to others and leave yourself out of that. And this is hard for some of us because some of us who have drive and want to be successful, strong egos are part of that. That nothing wrong with that as long as it's managed. But then we are very hard on ourselves. This is something I always struggle with. I still struggle with it, and you got to get out of that space. You have to be kind and loving to yourself, and hopefully have somebody who you can also um, go to help give you those doses of self-confidence. And what I always say is you have to train your significant other to just say, yes, dear, I hear you, I support you. That when it
There's
comes
our
to
marriage
something,
advice for today.
it
Anybody
is.
who's listening,
It's
just
it's
yes,
it's not
dear.
about fixing. It's not about fixing. It's about listening and support. I think, if I need help, if I need something fixed, it'll probably be a light switch or something like that. But when it comes time in my reflection, I say something, yes, dear, I hear you. So you have to have those people who actually know how to lift you up as well, because there's enough people to give you harsh feedback. You got to have some people who are always the uplifters in your life.
You really have to have those. And again, we're going to learn on that skill. Everyone's going to work on that positivity because it's a great skill set to hone in on. Real quick, I do want to go back to your work and the students and the program that you've been
Yeah.
building. And you talk about like acupuncture and using traditional Chinese medicine. So, how are your students adopting maybe even these different,
Mhm.
pathways of health? And like, do you see that they have different perspectives on how they want to enter the nursing field? Like, are they going into new areas? Are they going into different areas now? Are they wanting to like incorporate acupuncture now within their care practices? Like, how are they bringing that forward?
Yeah. So, acupuncture itself is its own licensed profession. So, it's not in the scope of nursing practice, I don't think, in any state. And there's very few states, I believe, who that even allow medical acupuncture to be practiced by nurse practitioners. But other than sort of acupuncture, there's a whole cadre, a whole toolbox that students and practicing nurses can start filling in terms of practices that are non-bio-Western, but extremely complementary and are within our scope of practice. For example, progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing, acupressure, gentle massage. There's something, all kinds of energy work, in terms of the understanding of there's a nursing modality called therapeutic touch. There's Reiki. So all of these things, I think students can incorporate, and professional nurses incorporate into their practice in terms of facilitating healing. We don't have any graduates yet, so I came on board a year ago to Pacific College of Health and Sciences to sort of lead this new adventure. And of course, you know, um, some students are more interested in it than others. What we're trying to do in the program is to also broaden the scope of thinking around things. So it's not all about the doing, it's not all about the pathology. And there's some students who resonate with that. There are some students who I think in their modalities class or in their facilitator of healing class might be a little challenged because they want to get to, the IVs and pharmacology. And I love all of that too. So it's just sort of helping them embrace the entire spectrum of what we can do as professional nurses in the pursuit of healing.
Well, and I appreciate that. Thank you for educating me too, right? Like on what we do see as some nurse that our nursing scope and
Mhm.
what are some of those standards. But and I do hope we get to a place where we have different healthcare models where you can go to a facility and have a nurse who is trained in these methods to help
Mhm.
you and support you and get you on a better health plan. I do kind of imagine, though, as you talk about students who have difficulty adopting, I feel like that was me for my mental health class. That was not my domain. I was happy once that class was over, but for those of you, mental health nurses are incredible, but it's finding right what your niche is and where your passions are.
Absolutely. And what we try to do is not introduce this as other or as sort of separate, but sort of truly integrated care. So in that BSN program that leads to licensure, we start with sort of a foundational course that really talks about the foundations of holistic nursing. And then they move on to a course in facilitator of healing role, learning and focusing on themselves. There's a clinical with that, where they do learn the role of the healer and they're able to practice that. That's kind of at the same time they're taking health assessment. Then when they move into like the fundamentals course, the big one where you're learning all the skills in the skills laboratory, there's a separate class on facilitation of healing using those modalities, and there's a lab with that. And then they move on in the next semester when they're really already taking care of fairly acute patients, a course in psychoneuroimmunology, which is really the mind body connection, the physiology. And we really explore deeply the connections between emotions, stress, negative life events and actual physiology as it affects neurotransmitters, as it affects different hormonal accesses, which necessarily then have profound effects on immunity, susceptibility of disease, progression of chronic diseases, and then affect all the other organ systems. So really, we tie that up so that they understand that really what they're doing for mental, spiritual, and social health is very tied to what they're trying to do for physiological health. And then we integrate that holistic framework in all the clinical courses too, so that we're focusing on sort of the relationship and the healing aspects in addition to everything they're learning in terms of Western biomedical, high acuity hospitals.
All of our hospital care. And I just, I look back and I listen to you and I kind of see this translation of you've had this clinical practice working with people in very difficult, often intimate, personal states
Mhm.
with infectious diseases and working with individuals who may have not received the best care because of who they were or how they defined. And now you've created this educational model that is aligning the acuity of care with the person-centered care and finding a way there. Do you see where this is, like, is this where healthcare education has to go? Like, if you look at your crystal ball and you are obviously an innovator and thinking forward, do you see this as that practice step to help us be better prepared for the healthcare environment?
I think it has to be. And I think here's sort of, the challenge when I say that. The requirements and what we need to know as professional nurses is encyclopedic at this point. I think the science that underpins nursing education keeps advancing. I think we're finding better ways to teach, more effective ways to teach. So we do need to, continue that, but at the same time, we have a healthcare system that is in just peril in terms of what happens to patients when they are in the healthcare system. Lack of knowledge, lack of coordination, lack of empathy, lack of ability to really address the whole person. So nurses have to be that. Not only do we have to be that, we want to be that, and that is our social contract with society. And there is no one better suited to do it. So we have to stress these things. I think we do. I don't think there's a nursing program who doesn't teach holism as the basis of what we are. But then how much do we focus on that in the clinical experience? So, how much do we focus on ensuring that the nurse patient relationship is established and, for lack of a better word, therapeutic? So, I go through when I talk clinical, even this is not new because I haven't taught clinicals um, since a year that had 2 9s in it. So that is dating me a little bit. But there was always this is how you enter a room. This is how you introduce yourself to the patient. This is how you sit at their eye level for that first minute, if nothing more, and talk to them and connect with them. That makes all the difference. Everything's still there. The fluids are still going. You still have to get to all of that. You got to enter everything in the electronic medical record, except there were no electronic medical records when I was teaching. So that is a little bit of an extra, a little hassle, which I don't exactly know how that gets implemented. No, I do. I'm just kidding. But it is true. There was no EHRs when I was practicing. But you have to stress that. That's who we are as a profession. And the other part of this is, we talked about sort of the patient care. We talked about self-care. The other part that we have to stress is that we are our brother and sister's keepers. So that care has to be directed laterally at each other. Has to be. We have to be there for each other. We have to make sure that, civility and support is part of our everyday functioning with our team. And that has to be stressed also. And we are accountable as educators for sowing those seeds and getting them to germination. And then hopefully graduate them into healthy organizations that will water, fertilize, and these will actually, I just came up with this analogy.
I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So, that model of care, 360, kindness, compassion, patient, self, others, is the norm.
Well, I will say Dr. Robinson is somebody who has gotten many awards and many achievements for your work. I can see why, just listening to you, and I'm sitting here being like, yes, like I want to own this for nursing. Like I want to be the better person as a nurse, to be that person for my peers, for my patients as an educator. And I just think it's incredibly inspiring what you've done. And I can only imagine for any of you who are listening, just sitting here and getting these bits of our soul and our mark and our profession. It's just amazing. And I just appreciate what you've been talking to me about because it resonates with me a lot.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very, very kind. I think that it resonates hopefully with all nurses, and now we just have to make sure people have the courage and the bravery to let it out. And just neutralize the naysayers, right?
We don't
you're
need
not
them. They can just go.
just make it, but you can. That's the thing. Negative people are going to be there. Whether or not you choose to focus on them is up to you. Here's what I also learned as a leader, and I think this fits. Um, you know, change is inevitable in organizations. And I have been often brought, part of the mandate when some of my executive leadership positions have been that change is needed. So what you have to do is you have to work with a coalition of the willing. And at some point, the people who are not willing, you have to respectfully just say thank you, and realize that this is either going to be an organization they fit into or it's not. And I think it's the same thing when we're talking about those who want to practice in a way that is not like what we've been talking about. Okay, they're never going to come along, and you just work with those who are willing and continue to shine your light and your kindness and your compassion.
It definitely makes it easier to show up every day when you work with
Mhm.
those people, doesn't it?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Makes you enjoy what you're doing when you're around those people and creating and cultivating that group that you can then sit and grow and change with.
Joy in work is incredibly important, and it is something that lots been written about. You can actually find some of that work in the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and some of the work, some of their writings and thought leadership in joy in work. But we deserve it, and we should demand nothing less than that. And you can be the source of that joy. And you can't be someone who takes joy from others without being a spark of joy yourself. And a lot of that also is uh, truly valuing your colleagues, right? We tend to think of the tangible benefits of our coworkers, but you have to, in my opinion, and what's made the difference in finding joy in work for me is deeply connecting with my colleagues, not on overly personal things, but I want to know who you are, who your children is. I want to know about, little Tommy or Katie. And I have developed interest in them because that makes me appreciate them far more as a colleague, and makes me also understand the way they are and the way they behave. Tells me a little bit about their values, and actually tells me a little bit about their work. um, a big part of joy is the strong relationships with those you work with. Probably not going to love everybody, but you gotta at least you just got to make at least an attempt to get to know them, and it'll make it a lot better.
A little bit of effort there, right, for that
A little bit of
relationship
effort.
in the long run. Well, Dr. Robinson, thank you so much. And I am honestly, I'm filled with joy just talking to you. Anybody, please, I strongly encourage you to go look at Pacific and what they're doing for their curriculum and for their students. I really hope and would love to see how your students progress in the healthcare environment, because we've got to do it a different way. I appreciate you so much as an innovator, as a challenger, as just a kind human. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Dr. Robinson. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I just really appreciate your joy.
Oh, thank you, Kendall. It was my honor, and again, thank you for your hospitality and being a wonderful host to me today.
See, that's where Dr. Robinson continues to fill my own bucket with the kindness for today. Thank you for all of our listeners who've been joining in. I hope this resonated with you as well, like it did for me. Please follow us anywhere that you achieve your podcast, but I'm sure both Dr. Robinson and myself would love your feedback. Please comment, share, tell us what you think, and hopefully you can bring a little bit of joy to those colleagues and people around you. But have a beautiful day, and thank you again to listening to us.